Hello guys, Pingow here. Welcome to New Falmouth. You are watching episode number 13. And today we are getting into the old harbour area, the kind of original harbourfront district that is one of the kind of first neighbourhoods of New Falmouth. It joins onto the old town, and it's a very important area. It's one of the most popular kind of tourist destinations. Lots of visitors come to the harbour front here, and it's really quite a key build, and it's one that I've kind of put off in terms of doing, because I've been focusing on some other areas, but actually this is a neighbourhood or an area of the city that I do really need to make some headway with, and that's what I'm doing in the next 2 episodes. So first of all, let me just say that I've been a little bit neglectful, I guess, in terms of New Falmouth. I have been quite busy the last month or so, and I've not really had a chance to get a video out for the city. I did do a big episode for my other city, Santa Caprizia, a few weeks back, and that did take a bit longer than I expected. And I've also done a couple of guest builds, which also have taken quite a long time, in fact, just to get those out and sort of edited and so forth. So you may be familiar with one of those guest builds. I did a rail yard for the Phoenician for his Berlin Noir series, and if you haven't seen the build video, then I would recommend checking that out. And there is also a link to the Phoenician's channel, which is a particularly interesting project that he's working on. As a link in the description at the bottom of this video, and I would suggest checking that out as well. And the other guest build I can't really reveal too much about at this stage. It's not actually released yet, but I'm hoping in the next week or so that should also be ready. So it has meant that I've been a little bit waylaid, let's say, and it is quite good, I must say, to get back into New Falmouth. I am really enjoying this city, and I'm really enjoying the whole kind of vibe that I'm getting now with this city. It's really starting to develop its own kind of personality, which is kind of what I was hoping to achieve with this build. It's taken me a long time to actually build the city, I have to say. It's still pretty compact. You can probably see there that it's not a huge place at this stage, and that's really just because it is quite a detailed project that I'm kind of giving myself here, really. It's taken me quite a long time to sort of build these areas, and the harbour, the old harbour district, is a case in point, really. It is a quite a, I say complicated, but certainly a pretty detailed build. And what I'm doing initially is just sort of working out these piers, these little kind of wharfs and things, trying to work out where they're going. And the way I tend to build those has pretty much remained the same throughout this series, which is using network walls to lay down the kind of periphery of the pier, and then filling up the void inside with some ploppable surfaces, just using the pavement or the asphalt ploppable surface just to cover that as a kind of ground detail, which I can then apply props and buildings onto the top. And this kind of format for these kind of piers and kind of like embankments and things seems to work fairly well for me. It might be possibly a little bit more fiddly than if I did it another way, but I find that it kind of works quite well, and I can have a lot more kind of control over it. Now, these ploppable surfaces I'm actually converting into procedural objects, and again that just gives me a bit of extra control in terms of positioning them. And you can see here I'm making a kind of boat ramp detail there. I could probably do a lot of this with Move It, but I find procedural objects are a better sort of option for me personally. Now, one of the things I found with this video is I had a lot of recorded video, let's just say, and even by the time I'd gone through and edited it, I still had around about 40 minutes or so, which I didn't really want to cut out any further. So I felt it was probably best to actually split the build into two and effectively release the second part of the old Harbour build in around about a week or so. It's pretty much all recorded. I just need to sit down and edit it and obviously put the video together. But I do feel that I didn't really want to make a longer sort of 40-minute episode. I think that's far too long. Personally, I like to keep the videos around about the 20-minute mark. I think that's a bit more kind of doable. Even a sort of sub 20-minute I think would be kind of a better sort of time for these sort of build videos. So hopefully you agree that it's probably more sensible to keep this build as two separate videos rather than one long one. And you know, I don't want to put people off by having a kind of 40-minute video. I think it's just going to make people kind of think, can't be looking at that. But anyway, the first part of the video, which is episode 13, the one you're watching now, is focusing more on the kind of main sort of working out the positioning of where these piers and things are going. I do a little bit of detailing as well, which you're seeing here, but most of it is going to be kind of bigger scale stuff. The second video, episode 13.5, will be focusing on an area just slightly to the kind of west of this area. Will be another pier, and there will also be a market, and it'll be more tailored towards kind of tourist and visitor kind of neighborhood, whereas this is actually kind of like a semi-working harbour, but it also has public areas like this little kind of square that I'm detailing up. So it's a kind of combination of a working harbour and a historical tourist and cultural quarter, let's say. And it's very much like a lot of cities that over the years may have lost their harbours and they've become kind of taken over by kind of leisure and culture and attract lots of tourists and visitors, rather than being industrial, sort of like fishing ports or anything like that. This harbour still has a little kind of fishing area to it, but it is predominantly going to be now pretty much orientated towards the public and tourism. So this little plaza or little square I'm making is one of the first public spaces. Nothing fancy, very simple, but it's just a kind of precursor to what's to come. So as you can see, nothing flash about that little public square there, but I think it's important to start setting out these areas, because this is, as I say, going to be a kind of transitional area. You've got a lot of these old warehouses and things that are gradually being converted into kind of cultural venues, possibly little kind of museums and things. The big warehouse on the right here is actually going to be will actually have a large kind of rooftop cafe on the top, which explains why there's a few people standing on top of the roof there that you may have noticed. And I'm using some raisable park people, I believe the asset is, just to add some pedestrians and extra people in there, because otherwise these areas can look a little bit kind of dry, and I really want to try and get more sort of foot traffic. You may have seen earlier on I was putting in a pedestrian path on the pier there and then changing that to an invisible path, and that's purely to try and get some kind of foot traffic to walk along the pier, which I do get later on. Particularly you'll see in the preceding episode when I release that, there's a lot more kind of pedestrian traffic in this area, but at this stage it's still pretty kind of empty, I guess. and that's not really what I want. I do want to get it to look more like a kind of, it has a bit of a life about it, this area. So what I am doing is, as I say, I am adding quite a lot of detail to this, putting lots of little warehouses and things, but also adding quite a lot of props in, trying to make it look like it has been or still is a kind of working area. And really these warehouses here probably are still being used as kind of storage for fishermen and things like that. Nets and things like that might be stored inside. And then these beams here are just to sort of protect the edge of the wall there on the pier. They serve no purpose really, but they are just the sort of details that you sometimes get around harbours and things like that. So I think it's quite interesting to put some of these little details in. And one thing I am doing a lot of in this episode is using procedural objects, which I haven't been using so much recently. I use PO a lot in my builds, but certainly with the guest builds that I've done recently, I didn't use procedural objects at all with those. And that's really just because I don't believe that the procedural objects export correctly when you export with MoveIt. I think the XML file that's created with the MoveIt exporter doesn't actually include for procedural objects, so I made sure that I didn't use any of those in those builds. But certainly with my own build here, particularly the Harbour, I am using PO quite a lot, and putting together some kind of more unique kind of designs, I guess. What I was doing there was actually trying to disguise that warehouse, because I'm using the same building on one of the other piers very close to this one. So I just added that little kind of network fence to the edge of the wall just to try and disguise it a little bit. One of the sort of tricks you can do, you can actually disguise some buildings by adding other elements to them, so you don't end up with just a series of copies. And what I'm doing here is adding some little fish props. So as I say, it's still a kind of semi-working environment, this, even though it's pretty much now just catering to tourism. I imagine that you'd still have a few fishermen bringing their catches on shore here and probably selling them to locals and tourists and visitors and so forth. So I wanted to put some little props in just to give it the appearance that it's still a working harbour. And getting down to actually editing these props themselves by converting those to procedural objects, so I can actually move these sort of crates of fish around. So it's kind of a level of detail that I'm going for here. I didn't want to just make it look like it's the same copied detail or the same copied prop. I wanted to try and mix it up a little bit. So this pier is kind of the middle pier. I guess this is pier number 2, I'm sort of calling it. And this is still very much a kind of working pier, although you'll notice I start to add a few little sort of cafes and eateries. There's a little seafood restaurant on the end of the other pier. I guess that's pier 1. And I'm also going to add a few little cafes and things onto this pier as well. And this is me again just disguising this this warehouse using these sort of network sound barrier, I think this is, just to stop it looking like the same warehouse as the one on the other pier. And I even decided to cover the roof itself, so in a way I might as well not have used the building at all underneath that. But it's yeah, I mean, hopefully it just kind of mixes the detail up a little bit and stops it from looking like a carbon copy. So episode 13.5, which I will imagine is, as I say, coming out in a week or so, is going to be focusing more on what I'm going to call pier number 3, which is the main kind of pier, and it's the biggest one, and it'll have a lot of bars and cafes on it. I'm also going to be doing a market, which at the moment is known simply as the fish market, but that's very much going to be a kind of tourist market, more like a kind of farmers market, selling lots of food as well as sort of knick-knack souvenirs, things like that. rather than it just being a kind of fish market. But I imagine that back in the day, maybe the fish market would have been where the fish obviously was sold, whereas nowadays it's pretty much taken over by tourists. So it's this kind of transition from a working harbour to a tourist destination, which I think is what's quite interesting. Some of these buildings I think probably would have been used as industrial fishing industry buildings, which are now being converted and changed into sort of eateries and little kind of restaurants and things like that, which, as I say, is something that you often get in those sort of cities that have got harbours. I would imagine that New Falmouth's harbour now has probably moved further along the coast. Maybe there's a big container port or something like that, which is vaguely in my kind of like plans for the city, but certainly nowhere near building anything like that at this stage. But I imagine that its main harbour's probably moved from this location, and maybe has kind of moved further out of the old town, certainly closer to possibly where the downtown area will be. This is just adding some kind of little umbrellas and things like that into the mix. Really just trying to make it look like it's kind of a destination rather than a working area. It's somewhere that people now go to eat fish rather than catch them. And these little benches, I'm using a lot of these on most of this area. And this is more just to keep it looking some kind of continuity, so it looks like it's the same. So as usual, I've been rambling away and I've completely forgotten that this is basically the end of the video. So as always, do like the video if you've enjoyed it, which is always appreciated, and do sub the channel if you haven't already subbed, because it's obviously the best way of keeping up to date with all my videos, which, as I mentioned, 13.5 will be released within a week, I promise you. So the second part of this kind of double header episode, and hopefully then you'll really get an idea of how this whole area is coming together. Do stick around for the cinematics at the end, and until next time, I'll bid you farewell. Take care. Cheers, guys.